Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're presenting Real in the Virtual by our expert, Emily Brady. My name is Sam Youngblood. I'm the content director here at Omnizant and your host for the webinar today. Before we get started, I wanted to point out the Q&A section on your screen. It is the question mark in a word bubble. Please type any questions that you may have into the Q&A box at any point during today's presentation. If we're not able to get to your questions by the end of this presentation, we'll follow up with you over email. So please submit your questions. We will get back to you after the fact if we can't get to them in today's presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce y'all to my colleague, Emily Brady. She's presenting to us today from Omnizant HQ in Port Washington, New York. She's Omnizant's Director of SEO and an expert in the field of law firm SEO. And I don't use the term expert lightly. She's been optimizing legal websites for search engines for the past 10 years. Today, she'll explain why SEO for law firms is constantly changing and which strategies AI can assist you with. Thank you, Emily. Go ahead and take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about Real in the Virtual, building trust and demonstrating expertise in the age of AI. And that is basically a fancy way of saying I'm going to be talking about authenticity and how that impacts not only search engine optimization, but your digital marketing strategy as a whole. So just to reiterate a couple things about me, my name is Emily Brady. I am the SEO director at Omnizant. We're a marketing agency for growth-focused law firms, and I've been helping law firms with their SEO for over a decade. Just about exactly half the amount of time that Google has existed, I've been doing SEO specifically in the legal space. I'm also an SEO speaker, so I've spoken at a couple conferences, which is basically to say I like talking about SEO. I like what I do, and I'm very excited to share with you all today. All right, so here's a table of contents, a few things that I'm going to chat through. I'll just go over these really quickly because we have a lot of slides to get through. But first, I want to talk about why authenticity in your marketing and specifically search engine optimization matters when it comes to building your website and presenting yourself and your law firm online. Why does Google care about authenticity? I'm also going to touch on how SEO has changed over the past 10 to 12 years. A lot has happened, right? I have a statistic on that later about how often Google changes its algorithms, but a lot has evolved since the time that I even started doing SEO. So I want to touch on a few of those highlights to provide some contrast between what things used to look like and what we're seeing today as far as AI is concerned and how Google has changed, but also the ways that your prospective clients have changed the way they interact with Google. We'll also be talking about kind of the meat and potatoes of our discussion today. They're going to be points 3 and 4. Authenticity 101, and that's EEAT. That's an acronym, and if you are not familiar with it, that's totally fine. It's actually kind of an advanced SEO framework or topic, but it's so relevant to any business on Google today, but specifically law firms, and I'll talk about why and explain what that is. We'll also talk about helpful content in Google as far as what does it look like to create helpful content, but also Google's helpful content updates and how it's changing its algorithm to identify helpful content. And then finally, we'll tie it all together with how all of these topics come together to actually impact your marketing strategy and how authenticity plays into all of this. And at the very end, you'll see a couple slides labeled Looking Ahead. If you have done any searches on Google in the past week or so, you may have noticed that Google rolled out a new feature. Those are AI summaries. So it's only about a week old, but I added some bonus slides at the end so we can chat through what that looks like. How do we adapt for this? Because it's very relevant to this entire conversation about your EEAT expertise, your authenticity, and then also creating helpful content within the context of a world where we all have access to AI now. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so why does this conversation matter? Why is authenticity important? And why am I so excited to talk about this? Well, over the past decade and a half, Google has changed, and it still is. So the things that used to work on the SEO front, the levers that SEOs used to pull, those are not the only things that we need to think about optimizing now. Google has gotten a lot better about understanding businesses online. So that evolution of search engine optimization, which is really just reflective of the evolution of Google, is a very important reason to talk about these topics, specifically within the context of artificial intelligence and the tools available to us now. Secondly, AI has changed the landscape as far as search is concerned. We see that with AI summaries and how Google is changing its search result pages. But it's done another interesting thing, and that is it's made it easy for pretty much anyone who has access to a computer and an internet connection to do mediocre marketing. So we have a lot of content that is being produced, right? And when it comes to AI content, and we'll talk about this, it's easy to just give a prompt and create something that's just not that great. And it's one of those scenarios where when everyone's special, nobody is, right? So we have this kind of rising tide of AI content being published. So how do you, as a law firm, as an attorney, as a business owner, actually stand out from the crowd? Because that's more important than ever. Here's a couple points about how SEO has changed. You do not have to be cognizant of all of these. I'll kind of run through them. But the main thing I want you to take away from this is that historically, Google was invested in ranking websites, right? It was looking at specific elements on your website and then ranking according to those things. Keywords are a great example of that. But now Google is much better at getting a three-dimensional view of your business or your law firm or you as a person as an entity. So Google is interested in ranking entities opposed to just ranking websites. Now your website is part of that, right? These elements are still important, but there's just a lot more that we have to think about. So thinking in terms of how can I optimize myself and my law firm as an entity that deserves to rank opposed to a website is really the transition that we've seen over the past 12 years or so, or the transition that I personally have seen doing SEO over the past decade or so. So just a couple specific things that have changed. Historically, ranking in the 10 blue links equaled success. If you remember what Google looked like about a decade ago, it's very different than what it looks like now. You would do a search and you would get that list of 10 blue links. But today, search results are a lot more complicated, right? You have maps, we have all kinds of ads flying around, we have lots of, there's featured snippets and larger answers at the top. We have people also ask dropdowns, all these different features that Google has brought into its search result page. So search results are more complex. Rankings are one of many metrics that matter, but there are a lot of different things to think about opposed to just, hey, am I ranking in the top 10? Historically as well, content used to be enough to rank, right? The most important thing that you could do was just write content. And to the point after that, adding keywords to that content, excuse me, was how you went about ranking. So content is still important, right? But Google now is able to understand the entity behind that content. So the entity publishing is important too. And that's really the crux of what we're talking about today is helpful content, but also how are you an authentic entity publishing and how does Google know that? So keywords, yes, you want to rank for keywords and adding those keywords to your content is important, but really you're doing that for the sake of people instead of search engines. So the content should be focused on people first instead of the search engines. A couple other things that have changed is SEO used to be for desktop search, right? Most people were doing their Google searches from their computers, but today your audience can find Google in many, many different places. We have, phones, tablets. There's a lot of different ways that people go about searching, voice search, mobile, all of that good stuff. So there's many avenues that your prospective customers can take to find you online. So we're no longer just optimizing for people sitting in front of their computers, but people who are on the go, people who in their daily lives are interacting with search engines. And then finally, this one's kind of just a fun call out, but historically, Google was a lot easier to manipulate. So a common tactic that would be used back when it worked was you could add a bunch of keywords to a page with white text against a white background, and those pages would rank because Google had no other way of identifying if that page was relevant, right? You could trick Google into ranking your website. But today, Google's algorithm is really complex. So if it's something that you can manipulate that easily, Google has probably found a way to close that loophole. So again, authenticity is super important because you can't trick the search engine into ranking your content. Or if you can, it's probably not going to last very long. So a lot of change has happened, but you can see a lot of this moves from thinking in terms of my website is my optimization to the entity itself, my law firm, myself, I am what is being optimized. And that's what Google's attempting to do too. AI has also changed SEO. It's changed the way we do SEO, and it's changed the way that we search as potential customers and clients on Google as well. ChatGPT has made it easier to do certain simple tasks that used to make a difference. I have a couple examples of that later on, but now we can automate more, right? So we can do our jobs a little bit faster on the SEO side of things. But it's also made it easier to create content that isn't super great. So it's important to think about, okay, AI has changed in good ways, but it's also made these tools accessible to everyone. So there is the opportunity for people to publish a lot of content that just isn't providing value to actual humans and is for search engines. So, think about how Google's going to approach that, and how Google is going to start treating mediocre content and things like that. It's changed the way that people interact with Google. I'll talk about the AI summaries later, but because we saw a big update within the last week, I think we'll expect to see more changes in the future too. So that's something to be cognizant of as well. Is AI has been a huge change, but it will also continue to kind of push changes forward on the SEO and digital marketing front in the future. So all that to say, standing out from the crowd is more important than ever. And that's why this concept of authenticity is so important, because you are what you are marketing. Your law firm is what you are marketing. And that's what Google is most curious about, not necessarily what keywords you're adding to a page. Here's a couple points about Google changing. I'm always surprised by this statistic, and I think about it quite often, but this data is from 2022. In 2022, Google updated its algorithm over 4,700 times. So that's about 13 times a day, assuming they're also working on the weekends. And even when I say algorithms, that's actually not accurate. It's many algorithms layered on top of each other. So Google is constantly changing the way that they produce search results. They're constantly refining their algorithm to find the best possible way to serve the correct websites and entities and answers to people who are searching. Now, you'll hear about core updates a few times a year. Those are the really big, important ones. The helpful content update that I'll talk about later is one of those core updates. But the reality is it's constantly changing. And one of those most recent changes that we've seen is generative AI. So the way that Google is able to summarize search results and provide answers at the top of the page is a very, very new feature, right? They've been testing and experimenting with it, but now it's rolled out for some searches in the US. So these are the types of changes that we're seeing, but it's good to keep in mind that Google is constantly changing. They're not just updating their algorithm once or twice a year. All right, so let's get into the core topics that are so important to this, topic of authenticity and how we demonstrate that to a search engine, and that is EEAT. So EEAT is an acronym. It stands for experience, expertise, authority, and trust. And basically, it's a framework that we can use to understand how Google defines relevant and high quality search results. So it's not exactly a ranking factor. You'll hear SEOs say that. They'll say, well, EEAT is not a ranking factor, but it's a concept, or it's a framework that Google has coined in its quality rater guidelines. And what its quality rater guidelines are is a 60-page document of information that Google provides to human quality raters, whose job it is to provide feedback to Google about how effective their search results are. So the fact that we have access to this information is pretty cool, right? Because it helps us understand how Google is attempting to measure the relevance of a particular search result. So it really helps us understand how Google understands your website, your business, and also your ranking potential. So it's not really part of the algorithm, but it's kind of functions like Google's SEO mission statement to a certain extent. And it's also recommended by Google for high quality content creation. So Google specifically says, if you want to perform well in search, in organic search, pay attention to this concept, pay attention to EEAT. All right, so here's what EEAT actually is. It used to just be EAT, experience. That first one is a newer addition to this list. EAT was a lot easier to say, but now it's double EAT. So we'll talk through all four of them. The first one is experience. And basically this attempts to quantify your firsthand experience as it relates to the services you provide, your practice areas, your actual real world experience, and how does that relate to the keywords or search queries for which you hope to rank. So when you think in terms of real world experience and how Google might use that to measure the relevance of a website or a blog article, for example. If you as an attorney were to publish a piece of content about whether or not someone can sue after they have a dog bite injury, or what to do after a car accident, how do I talk to my insurance company, things like that, that might be relevant to your potential clientele. If you were to write that page and then I was to write that page, it's pretty obvious which one Google would prefer to rank, right? And that's where experience comes in. I do SEO. I should be ranking for SEO terms, right? Because that's where my experience lies. So firsthand experience is actually very important to the way that Google understands your business, and it's part of this EEAT framework. Expertise, which is closely related but not exactly the same, is basically the necessary knowledge or skill. So do you have the certifications? Do you have the education to back up the topics that you're talking about? Are you an authority on this topic based on your expertise? So do you have the knowledge? Do you have the skills to actually help people who are searching for your services online? That's the expertise. And this goes back to education a lot, right? And in many professional services, and within the legal sphere, right, this is easy because you have to go through a lot of schooling and training to get to the point that you're at. But that expertise is an important factor when it comes to understanding the EEAT of an entity, whether that be your law firm or you as an individual. The third one is authority. This is probably the most ambiguous and vague one, and the hardest one to achieve as well, but it's important nonetheless. So authority attempts to quantify if you are a known authority on the topic that you're talking about. Are you known as an authoritative source of information within your community, within your sphere? Does your community and Google know who you are and what you do? And the important thing to think about, to know about authority is, when you look at like experience and expertise, those are all things that you can control, right? Like it's based on you as a person, your experience, your education. With authority, a lot of times those factors are going to be third-party votes of confidence. So are news articles talking about you? Do you have any media mentions? Those types of things. Are you a known entity? So I say it's the most ambiguous and vague because it's the most challenging to control, right? Because those third-party votes of confidence are what are gonna help you establish this type of authority. The final one is trust. And Google says within its quality rater guidelines that trust is the most important factor, but it's also the easiest to achieve. So yay. Trust basically refers to whether or not your content is accurate, honest, and safe. So when you're producing pages of content, when you're building your website, when you're picking your blog topics, are you doing that for a search engine? Are you doing it to manipulate search results? Or are you doing it with the best interest of your readers in mind? So this goes back to when it comes to AI content and everyone having the ability to create just kind of so-so content. This also means that everyone has the ability to create content that isn't fact-checked, right? So trust is super, super important, but it's also very easy to achieve because you know if it's accurate or not. You know if you have your reader's best interest in mind. So that's what EEAT is. That's the framework. But the real question that we need to be asking ourselves is, how can you demonstrate this to an algorithm, right? You know who you are in the real world, but how do we take all of that information and translate it into a website, into your online presence, your digital marketing footprint, and show Google that you deserve to rank based on all of this merit? So that's the important question to ask, and I will answer it a little bit later on. But before I do that, I want to dive into another super important topic, and that's Google's helpful content update. So I mentioned that Google has many, many algorithms earlier. They're all layered on top of each other and it's consistently changing them. The helpful content update first rolled out in August of 2022. And this was a really big update. They've since iterated on it a few times, and they typically tell us, hey, we're rolling out another helpful content update. So this means that Google is super focused on helpful content. It's very important. And because trust, that accuracy within your content, is an important part of EEAT, it's important for us to talk about, okay, how does helpful content apply to our SEO today? How do we actually achieve content that is truly helpful? So a quick note, though, before I dive into what the helpful content update looks like and kind of what it means for you as a lawyer, as a law firm, and for the content you're producing for your prospective clients, is the helpful content update and EEAT is especially important for law firms, because when you are writing content and publishing on your website, the topics that you're talking about and the topics that your website talks about are going to fall into this category that Google labels your money, your life topics. So YMYL topics. It's kind of a mouthful to say, but essentially what this means is if a topic could significantly impact someone's safety, their financial well-being, their health, Google is going to analyze it with a higher level of scrutiny. So this can also be found in the Quality Rater guidelines. It's a topic that's discussed there. And these YMYL topics, they're something that can directly and significantly either cause harm or have the risk of causing harm to someone or impact their life in a big way. So when you think about things like alimony, child support, or estate planning, even personal injury when it comes to people's lives, these types of topics are going to be viewed with a higher level of scrutiny than, how do I get wrinkles out of my clothes or something like that, right? The stakes are much lower for that type of a search. So legal content and the content on your website falls into this YMYL bucket of topics. So Google is looking at it very closely, and the helpful content update is just something that SEOs and law firms really need to pay attention to because of that. So one quick call out too is the YMYL topics exist on a spectrum. So a lot of legal content is going to fall into this category, but some more than others, right? So be aware of that when you're creating content or when you're thinking about things that you want to be publishing on your site. And just remember that some of the ones that have higher stakes for the readers are going to be viewed a little bit more closely by Google. Again, so that higher level of scrutiny, very applicable to law firms specifically, as well as like medical topics and things like that. So with that in mind, Google's helpful content updates. Again, I say updates. It's the helpful content algorithm, but they've been iterating on it and updating it a couple times a year since it came out in 2022. But as far as Google algorithms go, it is a relatively new one, right? And the goal is to emphasize original and people-first content. So I referenced earlier how websites used to rank by merit of keywords on a page. Today, Google is less concerned about the keywords that you've included on the page. It's much better at understanding the context of what you're writing about and the actual value of it as it would be valuable to someone who's actually reading it, right? So write your content for people first, not for search engines. Stuffing keywords into your content is for search engines. It's just not going to work anymore. Google has become a lot more complex than that. It's a lot smarter than that. And it wants to see content that primarily serves humans and not just for the benefit of ranking. Something else to know about the helpful content update is that the impact is weighted, right? So this update rolls out. Maybe you've been writing content for a long time. Maybe your marketing agency back in 2012 was writing content that was definitely for Google first, had a lot of keywords in there and not a lot of value. What do you do in that situation? Well, the impact is weighted. And basically what this means is the more the merrier, or not, depending on the quality of the content. Google knows that your website isn't perfect, but what you should be aiming for is to have a majority of the content be helpful, right? To fall under this umbrella of truly people first and helpful. So if your website's not perfect, that's okay. But if you have 100 pages and 95 of them really are helpful, and there's 5 that are maybe a little outdated and not perfect, Google understands that. So websites that have a higher percentage or a higher volume of helpful content pages are more likely to see a lift when these updates roll out, opposed to websites that have a higher volume or higher percentage of unhelpful pages may see a more significant drop. And then, of course, everything in between, right? Again, a lot of law firms have been publishing for a long time. It's one of those industries that was an early adopter of search engine optimization. And with that comes kind of the inherent risk of a lot of content has been published, but are you going back and updating it to make sure that it's all still helpful? And Google does understand that. So the more the merrier, but it's not something where if you have one unhelpful page, your whole site's going down, right? So Google gets that. It's also one of many signals. This is where EEAT comes in, right? So the content itself has to be helpful, and it has to be trustworthy and factual and be people first. But all of those EEAT signals we talked about earlier, the experience, the expertise, Google wants to know as well, is the entity publishing it worthy of ranking too? So it's the page, but then it's also your authenticity as an expert in your field. that is going to help you achieve search rankings and search results. So helpful content alone isn't enough, right? Part of helpfulness is whether or not you are an authority, whether or not you have that expertise. So it's just one ingredient of many things that Google is looking at to kind of get that 3D view of your law firm instead of just the two-dimensional view of the text on the page. So in the world of AI, how do we use AI, and can we use AI to create helpful content? This is a really exciting topic for me because I think the answer is yes, we can use AI to create helpful content, but we have to go about it very analytically and very judiciously. And here's a couple things that we have learned over at Omnizant as we have really invested in creating content that is helpful for our clients' readers. So first way that you can do this is use AI to create page outlines. So if you have a really common question that your prospective clients ask you during intake, what are some of those questions? Maybe you should write about that. But what are the subtopics you include on that page to make sure it's truly helpful to someone? Well, you can have a conversation with ChatGPT and say, hey, here's my ideal audience. Here's what I'm looking to achieve. Give me some suggestions for a page outline. It can be really effective for that. So it'll give you, again, an outline of just subtopics that are related to the larger topic. AI is helpful in that way. You can also use it for competitor analysis. So feeding ChatGPT pages from your competitors and asking it to analyze the subtopics so you can get content ideas, improvement opportunities. So what are they talking about, but also what are they missing that I can include on my website? As well as things like tone and style. So if you see a website that you really like and you like the way that their content works, it really speaks to your audience as well, you can have ChatGPT analyze it and give input on tone and style so that then you can adopt that on your own site or relay it to your marketing company to help understand exactly how to represent you online and really speak to your audience. Another way you can use it is for title tags and headers. I mentioned earlier that AI has made it faster to do things that were kind of the most important part of SEO way back in the day. So when I first started doing SEO in 2012, my day was full of writing title tags and headers. So when you do a search and the blue links show up, what you're clicking on is a title tag. Someone typically writes that, as well as just the headers on the page. You know, those elements that should include the keyword that you're wanting to rank for, but aren't the only and most important thing anymore. But way back in the day, this was my entire day, right? It was creating title tags, headers, those on-page SEO elements that were so important for ranking. But today, they're less important because Google is looking at more factors, but also they're a little bit formulaic. So you can actually use ChatGPT to help generate these things. So that can save time so you can focus on other important details. Finally, you can also use AI for drafting. And I think this is probably the most common question or concern is, can we actually use it to write the content? Well, if you've gone through all the other steps, so page outlines, competitor analysis, giving it an understanding of your ideal audience, like who are you speaking to, what types of clients are you hoping to help, then yes, you can use it for drafting. And I have some specific tips on this in a future slide, but basically you can use ChatGPT to start rough drafts. You can give it your outline and ask it to begin filling it in one section at a time and treat it as a conversation. So if it gives you an answer and you're like, that output doesn't cover the important topics, or it's like missing data that I want to include, things like that, treat it as a conversation, have it rework it, and don't move on to the next section until you're really happy with what you have. So do it in bite-sized pieces and actually start drafting your content that way. Now, 2 important warnings, right? So yes, you can use it for drafting, for your outlines and all of that good stuff, but 2 things you want to pay close attention to. One is that your content needs to include some kind of unique value. So AI is really good at creating pages that talk about information that's just common knowledge, right? But it can't inject your unique perspective. So your perspective matters when it comes to your content. That's one of the ways you can demonstrate the EEAT, your authenticity, on your page of content, is by having a unique point of view, right? But AI can't do that for you. You actually have to inject that yourself as a human, right? So additionally, you also want to make sure that you have human intervention when you're creating AI content. And that's because ChatGPT, if you ask it something and it doesn't know the answer, very often it will hallucinate or make something up, which means there's a certain margin for error when it comes to inaccurate information. So if you're going to use AI to write your content, you need human intervention and editing. So an example of this would be for legal focused content, we use JD writers, right? You want to have a JD writer editing your content to make sure that it is accurate and that it's not providing information that could be misleading or misunderstood by Google as not having the best interest of the reader in mind. So to answer the question, yes, you can use AI to create helpful content, but you want to do that with human intervention. And you also want to make sure that you're injecting your unique perspective into it, because that's really important as well. So the way I think about it is there are kind of two types of content when it comes to creating helpful content on your website specifically. There's that general information, that generic content. AI is really, really good at doing this, right? If it's common knowledge, if you could Google it and get the right answer, then it's going to be something that AI can probably help you write. It's very useful for creating that type of content. This is the type of content that any website wanting to rank for the same keyword should also be talking about in some capacity. That's why I label it as generic. So ChatGPT is good at generating that type of content, but you also want to make sure that you're including unique value content. So your unique perspective needs to be in there as well. That's the value that no one else can really add to the page. So AI can't put your unique spin on things. So it's important to make sure that your insight is present in the content as well. And that's why human intervention and editing is so important. So the way I think about it is until AI can actually replace your job, it also shouldn't fully replace your content writing as well, right? So it can't replace you. You still need to be present in your website content to avoid having it be potentially misconstrued as unhelpful, right? And adding that layer of unique value is one of the ways that you can make sure Google understands that it truly is helpful and with the best interest of your readers in mind. So just a couple quick tips for creating content with ChatGPT, creating helpful content with ChatGPT. Don't give it one brief and have it write the whole page. You want to have a conversation. You want to give it instructions. It's really only going to be as good as your output is only going to be as good as the input that you're giving the chat. So make sure that you are interacting with it and correcting it along the way. Your AI content is going to be only as good as the prompts that you give it, again. And you also want to make sure you're feeding the chat information before you tell it to write. So source materials, audience information, all that good stuff is going to help give it context that will give you better output. Again, I said it once, but I'll say it again, never publish content without fact checking it first. AI will hallucinate. If you ask it for statistics and data, it will definitely give you numbers, but they're not going to be real ones all the time. So make sure that you're really looking at that type of factual information with a heavy level of scrutiny so that it's accurate. And then finally, write in bite-sized pieces. You can train the AI by feeding it information and instructions, tone and style, audience, and then guide it through the writing process. All right, so one final thought about AI content. What does Google say about this? Does Google view this as a good thing? Like, should we be doing this? So historically in Google's guidelines, there was verbiage that could be understood as discouraging AI generated content, but with the advent of ChatGPT, Google's actually updated their guidelines to make it a little bit more focused on the value of the content itself, opposed to the method by which it's being written. So Google really aims to reward high quality content however it's produced. That is a quote from them. And one other thing that they bring up is the fact that poor quality human written content has always existed as well. So if you have AI assisting you with a page that turns out great, and then I come in and write a low quality page without the help of AI, this page should still rank, right? The page that has the highest quality is what Google is interested in serving to searchers. So any content that's intended to manipulate rankings, whether it's AI or human created, has always been against Google guidelines. And that's really the core here, is that Google's objective has always been the same, to give helpful and relevant content. It's just now some of it happens to be written with the assistance of an AI. So another thing too, to keep in mind to the final point, is automated content has also always existed. It's just that we all have access to it now. So Google isn't super concerned about who's writing the content, but rather it's concerned about the entity publishing it, right? But if you're using AI to help you out, that's okay. And here's a quote from Google that says, however content is produced, those seeking success on Google search should be looking to produce original, high quality, people first content demonstrating the qualities of EEAT. So that's really where helpful content and EEAT come together. This is where authenticity becomes that core concept for us when it comes to being successful on Google. So it doesn't matter how you're writing it, as long as it's demonstrating these qualities and it's trustworthy, that's what Google cares about the most. Okay, so let's tie this all together into a tangible strategy. So how does this actually impact a law firm that is looking to get more visibility on Google search by showcasing your authenticity? Again, that question I asked earlier, like how do we demonstrate EEAT to an algorithm? Well, as well as how do we demonstrate that through our helpful content? So from a strategy perspective, step one is going to be to invest in great content. Google has been rolling out this helpful content update and iterating on it. And that tells me and it tells us that helpful content is more important than ever. I don't think it's a coincidence that Google rolled out the helpful content update and that ChatGPT came along kind of around the same time and that it keeps iterating on this helpful content update. Google is very aware that we all have access to AI tools that make it easy to produce mediocre content. So now is the time to invest in really good content because a lot of publishers out there are trying to cut corners, and by not cutting corners, you stand a better chance of getting more visibility that way. Google's emphasis on EEAT specifically for law firms in those your money, your life topics tells us that it's not just about the content itself, but it's also about who's publishing it. So when you think about helpful content, it's not who's saying it, or it's not what is being said, but it's also who is saying it as well. So those two things need to work together. Always focus on your audience when you're creating content. Let your clients guide you, right? So let your prospective clients guide you. People first content on a website that might not be perfect, right? Of course, you need a great design. You want a great design. It should be fast. It should be light. It should look great. All of those things. But people first content on a quote under optimized site will probably perform better than Google first content on a great website. I say probably. It definitely will, right? Because the people first element is the most important thing to Google. Everything else, your design, your website performance exists to support that. And then finally, let your clients guide you. So what are their common questions? What do your clients think they need your help for when they call you versus what do they actually need from you if there's a difference there? So what are those frequently asked questions? What are their biggest concerns when they walk in the door or pick up the phone? That's the type of content those are the questions and topics you need to be addressing on your website. So really let your clients guide you opposed to thinking in terms of, oh, I got to just add all of the keywords onto this page and I'll rank that way, because what Google is looking for is a real investment in your audience and your readers. Additionally, showcase your authenticity. This is another way that your strategy should be impacted by what we know about EEAT and helpful content. There are a couple ways you can do that. I'll go through these pretty quickly, but basically you can highlight your experience by highlighting reviews on your website. Reviews are essentially real world votes of confidence, right? They not only help you rank in Google, but they can also show real people that you have helped people like them solve similar issues with a similar service. So that experience element of EEAT, you can accomplish that with reviews and testimonials. Additionally, as you are publishing content, attribute authorship to it, right? So tie in you as a person into your website content as well. This is specific to blogs. Not every website page needs to have a blurb about the author on it, right? But when you're creating blog articles and things like that, showing that there's a human behind the content is a great way to highlight the expertise, to show that someone with expertise created that content. You also want to have about us pages or bios on your website. This might seem kind of like something that we all take for granted. Like, of course, my law firm website is going to have an about us section, but this is actually a great way to highlight both expertise and experience, because here you can provide information about your accolades, your education, all of that great stuff, all of the certifications that you have, all of those bragging rights that come into play when you're thinking about expertise and experience. Google pays attention to that. So really making it as transparent as possible is important. And your bio page or your about us page is the best place to do that. You also want to make sure that you're publishing trustworthy content at a regular cadence. This is where that trust factor comes into play, right? So if you're publishing content relatively regularly and it's accurate, it's helpful, Google can tell that you have your audience's best interest in mind. That consistent publishing cadence is going to help demonstrate that you are an authentic entity, you're an authentic person, an authentic business, and show that you're a trustworthy source of information. So again, publishing content regularly, but also publishing high quality content. So quality is always more important than quantity, but creating regular content is definitely part of this EEAT strategy. Authority, I mentioned earlier, is probably the most challenging of the EEAT items to achieve, but the best way to do it is to be newsworthy. I know that's easier said than done, right? But getting media mentions is a really good way to establish authority, being involved in your community in a way that will get you mentioned in news articles or be interviewed about topics related to your practice. That's a really good way to establish authority as a known entity within your community and the legal sphere in the eyes of your prospective clients, but also in the eyes of Google as well. So be newsworthy. In marketing, we call that earned media, right? We want to make sure that you are getting those votes of confidence from third-party publishers and not just your own website. Finally, I want to mention social media. I think this plays into the authority piece probably, but it's really kind of just overall shows that you are an authentic entity that's interested in engaging with your audience, which is social media. And the reason I call this out is because when we talk about AI summaries in just a little bit, you'll notice that Google is actually paying attention to certain social media sites when it comes to developing these AI answers to people's questions on Google search. So linking to social media shows Google you're a real person, but it can also be looking at those sites for answers to certain questions as well. So I think it's worth mentioning social media. It may not be the most important one of all of these, but definitely a best practice to include if you are involved on social media. All right, so looking ahead. So that's kind of the basics of the strategy, but what about this change that we recently saw with AI summaries last week being rolled out in Google search? So if you haven't seen them, this is what they look like. There's a lot of notation on this slide, but I'll just walk through it really quickly. We have our search query at the top, and then you can see there's a carousel there of some sources. Those link out to websites that actually talk about that topic. There you can actually see LinkedIn is being pulled in. That's why I mentioned social media, right? So Google is paying attention to certain social media sites. And then in the blue boxes, we have two summaries. Those summaries are generated by AI, and it's basically summarizing the search result page for me. So I don't need, well, depending on how satisfactory the answer is, I don't need to click into any of those websites to actually get the answer. So this is what Google's attempting to do, and that's what it looks like. It's very obvious that it's set aside. It has AI overview at the top, and it's shaded a little bit differently. But you can see that's an AI-generated answer to just a normal Google search. So what I want to chat through really quick in the next 5 minutes or so is how these work. What do they look like? And then kind of what I've seen so far anecdotally as it relates specifically to law firms. So how you might need to adapt your strategy, but then also how are your prospective clients interacting with Google in a new way, and does this apply to you? One thing to note before we dive in is that I think an interesting takeaway here is that Google is no longer just using your authority, your authenticity, your EEAT, and your content just to rank, but now it's actually using those two elements, your content and your real world authority and expertise, to generate its own answers to searchers' queries. So that's a kind of a shift in the way that we think about SEO a little bit. And again, this is very new, right? But it is an interesting thing that Google is doing. Now it's taking all of these publications and all of these websites that have real world expertise and generating AI answers based on their content. So that's basically what's happening here. But tangibly, what does this look like for you and for your clients? So here's an example of what I would consider a your money, your life query, something that may be a relevant to a personal injury law firm, right? A pretty common topic. Can I sue someone after a dog bite? Here's an example of an AI summary there. You can see it's showing up in green. And then underneath that, we have a couple links to websites. So the AI summary, links to websites. And then right below that, we have the old websites, like the old ranking, the old search result page underneath it. And that second one, the one with the purple arrow pointing at it, that's a direct quote from a ranking website. So that's what you used to see. I have another example on the next slide. But the old result and the new result are right next to each other. So in some situations, we do see legal adjacent topics generating these types of summaries, and the old and the new are kind of next to each other. But what's really interesting is the more high stakes the topics get, the less often I am seeing these AI summaries show up. So AI summaries are going to impact how Google answers your client's questions, but anecdotally, I'm not seeing them as often for YMYL queries. So the example I have here is, what should I do if my child is arrested for stealing? So that's a significant, like that's a concerned parent searching on behalf of their child. And the answer to that question really could impact their well-being, right? So Google is not yet trusting AI summaries to answer this question. And just again, anecdotally in my experience, I'm not seeing it show up too often for really serious legal queries, which is interesting. It shows that it's perhaps a bit more experimental than many search results are. So something I'm noticing is a lot of legal topics are not yet showing up with these AI summaries. Another note here is, I think a primary concern is if Google is summarizing answers, well, now they're not going to click on my website. But what I'm seeing here is a local search. So this is specific, right? Because this is someone in marketing, we call this a bottom of funnel search, because when someone says business lawyer, Washington, D.C., they need a specific service and they are looking to make a purchase or to make a buying decision, right? And for those, I'm also not seeing AI summaries too often, at least not for legal searches. So local searches might be treated a bit differently. I'm not sure yet, but we don't have a summary here because the most relevant search result is going to be a list of businesses. And that's what Google Maps is already doing. So all that to say, we're not seeing too much in the way of these AI summaries in legal search results. But I would imagine as Google moves forward and continues to evolve this technology so that the answers are as trustworthy as possible, we probably will see it show up a bit more for those your money, your life queries. So that could impact your strategy. So how do we adapt to AI summaries, right? Like it's a new thing, but we need to be thinking ahead, right? So far, there's no secret sauce. This is extremely relevant to this topic. And I'm glad that we're talking about AI content and this EEAT framework as it relates to your authenticity online, because the strategy is the same, right? When you look at those sources and you look at how things are summarized, what Google is looking to do is summarize information from trusted entities that have posted trustworthy content. So publish helpful content and demonstrate your experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. So the best way to really adapt to this new feature, if you want to try to rank in the summaries as a cited source, is to be source worthy. All right, so just a few final takeaways to kind of summarize not only AI summaries, but everything we talked about previously is content is important, but so is the entity publishing it. You are important too. Google is paying attention to your law firm as well as what you are saying. You want to make sure that as much as possible, you're seeking to translate your real world EEAT, your experience, your authority to the online world. And that's what your SEO strategy shift should be. Not what levers can I pull to rank, but rather how can I translate who I authentically am in a way that Google will understand and that my clients will see online. Leverage AI, yes, it can be a wonderful tool, but don't rely on it too much. And then finally, pay attention to how search is changing, right? And be ready to change with it. We've seen a big update in the last week. That's very exciting for me to talk about as an SEO nerd, but it's also something that can impact your strategy. So pay attention to the direction that Google is going and be ready to change with it. And with that, thank you very much.
Great job, Emily. Thank you so much. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. If you haven't yet, please type your question into the Q&A box near the bottom of your screen. So while you do that, I'll share a couple of little tidbits with you. Emily mentioned the importance of human intervention when working with AI-generated content. I would be remiss as the content director to not note that if you hire Omnizant, our writers have their JDs. So in working with us, you can rest assured your content is either being written entirely by a lawyer, or if they use ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini to create content, then an attorney is prompting and reviewing and editing those AI tools' output. Additionally, I wanted to share an exclusive discount that we're making available to you for attending today's webinar. We're proud to offer DC Bar members a $500 discount. on website development and marketing services. And this can be applied to an Omnizant website, an SEO plan, or a One First legal website, which is our sister company product. So thank you again, Emily. And I see here that we have a couple questions that have come in already. So Cedric is asking, can Google detect when content has been created fully or partly with AI tools?
Great question. This is, I wish I had a perfect answer to it. So I'll give you my experience and my opinion on it. But it is a good question, right? Because it also begs the question, if Google can detect it, would that be problematic in the future? When ChatGPT first rolled out, the general consensus in the SEO community was if a robot can write it, a robot can understand, can detect it as well. But that said, there hasn't been too much more discourse about that because Google has explicitly said it's okay to use this as long as it's helpful. That said, there are some tools that exist to help identify AI generated content. And I think we as humans are also getting to a point where we can sometimes detect if something feels a little bit too AI, right? But the goal should be the experience is the same between human written and AI written. So those tools do exist. If you Google, AI content detection, those types of things, you'll see them. I would say, I don't know if Google can, and I don't know if they've explicitly said that they are able to. I would err on the side of saying if they cannot do it with 100% certainty yet, they will be able to at some point in the future. But because they have specifically said that the content itself, the value of the content is the most important thing, then I am not too concerned about it at this point, right? I also think that if Google's ability to detect is evolving, AI will also evolve to the point where it'll become more difficult to detect. So SEOs always say it depends, but I think it does depend in the situation about the quality of the content, because the real red flag is going to be whether or not it's good.
Thank you. And this question does have a part two. So Cedric is also wondering, should a lawyer reveal that they have edited some of their articles with AI tools, or explain to the extent that they have used AI?
I've seen, so I'm not going to answer this specifically because I think that would partially rely on how ethics committees are responding to this. So that might be almost a better question for the bar potentially in many situations. Yeah, I would have to sit on that and think about it a little bit more as far as like revealing that information, because from an SEO perspective, I'll tell you from an SEO perspective, strictly opposed to a legal perspective, but from a search engine optimization perspective, it would be more important to attribute yourself as an author, saying like whether or not AI assisted you in creating it, there is a real human attached to this content, because that's going to be a quality indicator. I think from an audience perspective, if the quality is good, I personally do not care if it was written by an AI. And I think that's how Google treats a lot of this content as well. But again, like there will be other factors at play there too. So I don't want to mislead without having more specific information on it. But from a strictly SEO perspective, I don't believe that's required, right? And I don't think that's going to help or hurt you.
Thank you. That's a good point. Okay, our next question came from Jason, who also asked earlier in the presentation if these slides will be available to people who registered for the webinar. And the answer is yes. We will be sending a recording of this webinar to the email address that you initially registered with. But Jason came back and is asking, as AI evolves, will Google no longer provide links to websites? And in other words, is it a waste of time to publish content on a website?
So good question. And that's the alarm bells that start going off in every SEO's mind, right? Because traffic is such a big metric for us. I wish I had a crystal ball I could look into and know exactly what it's going to look like in say 1 to 5 years. I would hazard to guess that if we get to a point where links to websites are not being provided in any of these answers, at that point, you would have another way of getting customers through search engines. if that makes sense. So the reason I say it is like those searches where AI summaries are starting to show up, those are most often not the types of searches that would yield a list of websites, or like that would a list of websites that are businesses. So the search terms that AI doesn't seem to be prompting summaries for are the ones that are most likely converting into leads for you. So I would say it's definitely still worth publishing content, because if you show up in that summary, even if you're not linked, Google is still using your information to develop an answer. And that's still a vote of confidence, right? Like Google is still, even if it's not giving you credit and not giving you traffic for it, for those really top of funnel keywords about, can I file a lawsuit for this? Or should I establish a will or a trust? Like those types of things, when someone doesn't know that they need you yet, those are the ones where I think there's a higher risk of there not being attribution back to the website from which they're pulling the answer. However, those are also typically not the ones that immediately convert into leads. So I think when I would be more concerned is if those bottom of funnel local searches where someone says, I need a lawyer that does this near me, those are the ones that are most important. So again, kind of an it depends answer. I don't know what direction Google is going to go, but I do think that there would probably be some backlash from the SEO community if they really did remove those source citations, especially because there has to be a heavy amount of liability in those AI answers. So being able to show their sources, they're kind of doing like a reverse EEAT there with it, seems to me in the best interest of the people searching. And I think that that's Google, what they're trying to achieve. So again, I don't know. That's the direction I would tend to see it go. But historically, when Google has not cited sources, it tends to be upsetting to the people who are creating content. So I would think they'll probably keep them there. And I would say it is still worth publishing content. Long answer to a short question, but a good one.
Yeah, but a great answer nonetheless. We also got a question from Maria that I really like, and Emily, I'm going to take a stab at answering this first, and then if you have anything that you want to add, please do. But she's asking, what if you don't know how to use AI at all? How does one get started using it? And Maria, I'm going to see if we have great Omnizant on the Omnizant website, as well as our One First website. We have great blogs with a lot of helpful information for lawyers on marketing your businesses. I'm going to check and see if I can find a blog post that ties back to this specific question. But my recommendation is to sign up for a free ChatGPT or Claude account. My personal preference has been Claude of late, but you can sign up for a free account and test out what, prompting the AI, engaging with it, and maybe in some low stakes ways, like working with it to plan a vacation, for example, or, it kind of just becoming more familiar with how to utilize it as a tool. But I found even in using a free account for Claude, that I'm able to get a significant amount of usage out of it and have been learning along the way. So that's kind of my first take, is just a recommendation to sign up for a free account while you can, and just explore, engaging with it. And then Emily, I don't know if you have an additional recommendation.
One recommendation, one specific prompt that really changed my perspective on how to use, this is for ChatGPT, for both for drafting outlines, all that kind of stuff, but even on the more technical side, treat it like a conversation. So go into the chat box and propose what you're trying to do. Like, hey, I want to write a blog about XYZ, or I'm attempting to do this. And then one of the most powerful prompts that I have learned is, can you do this? And can you help guide me through that process? ChatGPT can teach you how to use it to get those most effective answers. And like Sam said, just play around with it in a low stakes way and just kind of test it and see how you can manipulate the output to get where you're hoping to do. But the AI itself can also talk to you about its capabilities and tell you what it can do and kind of guide you through that process, even by having it prompt questions back to you so you can be providing more detailed input and whatnot. So yeah, just experiment, sign up for a free account, again, low stakes, and just hypothetically see if it will accomplish the task you're wanting and how you can get different results based on how you talk to it.
Yeah, great. Well, that's really all the time we have today, y'all. So thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate you being here. Great presentation, Emily. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. with us. If Omnizant can help you marketing your firm, please reach out anytime. And again, if you want to take advantage of the $500 discount that we're offering in conjunction with this webinar, we'll be happy to hear from you. As well as if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us via our website as well. So again, thank you for attending and have a great day. Bye now.